It's the start of July 2026 on the back end of the new event for Swimsuit Shun and Swimsuit Kisaki. And we've got a new installment in the musical raid of Gregorius. It's been quite a while since I last made raid commentary content, but this time's got something especially at stake for me. This has everything to do with Gregorius being my last revenge platinum trophy. So I'm pork barreling in my little adventure of completing my cafe trophy set. The more generally appealing topic goes first though. This is Gregorius Season 90. That's the 6th time in the history of the game we've faced the musical menace, including grand assaults. For Lunatic being available, it's the 2nd time. During the first sprint, less than 1,000 people were able to pull out a clear. It was pretty tough, and it was a statement from the devs. You're going to play this raid like intended. Use special students, or else. Because they upped the HP by 5 times. The attack debuff applied to strikers by the yellow wave could no longer be cleansed. Usually you'd get it removed with the Organ's white wave. As well as special students being the only one to get a damage boost in the final phase with guaranteed critical hits. Gregorius is one of the bosses from after we stopped getting 2 terrains per boss. So absolutely nothing has changed in the specs of the boss from the first run. All the changes are to the power we bring to the raid. For that, we've got 3 new students tailored for Gregorius. So let's talk about what they do and how they've brought Greg down a peg. First off, there's Swimsuit Misaki. She's the new latest and greatest special attacker for Red AoE. Before Hina was set up to dominate, Minori was the premier Gregorius damage dealer. And then immediately after they forced us to use special students, Minori got a moment back in the spotlight. John doesn't actually like worker rights though, so at the first chance, he hired a scab from the infamous Arius terrorists. I don't mean it, they're good girls. Misaki doesn't get any fancy choose the cost you fire at EX. Instead, we got something with the specialization of a turkey baster. Her gimmick is doing more damage the more debuffs that her target has. Does that sound familiar? Because it should. That's exactly what Gregorius' mechanic is in the first place. And he shares that with a grand total of 0 other raids. But at least she's the best at that. For now. Minori technically has a higher raw ratio, but it takes 7 cost versus Misaki's 6. On a ratio for cost basis, Misaki comes out ahead in addition to having a higher base attack. That's not including having the better passive skill that gives crit damage, something Minori was unfortunately not blessed with. Accuracy passive. How vestigial. I can't calculate all the scenarios that you'd be using her in, but suffice to say it's quite a significant gap in damage potential. In some napkin math level calculation, she does a good bit more. And that's the gist of what I've got from Misaki. I'm definitely not being biased here. Happy for you, Misaki? And then, what's a DPS without their supports? Misaki can be paired with the new latest and greatest in special supports. It's still a small cohort, but it's steadily growing as they try to tempt us with damage different from the standard striker Buster EX. First up on that is Rena. Someone thought up the bright idea of basically combining Idol Sakurako and Idol Asuna. And this is what we got. She's compact in stature, but don't let that fool you. She's packing heat. That aforementioned combination of the two results in critical damage and attack damage. This makes her point-for-point bonus more powerful than just having a single type, since they can multiply off of each other. Beyond the bonus in damage, she does bring something else to the table that has already been put to good use by the teachers in the lab. She can heal. This too can almost be considered a carryover of School Asuna who heals in a circle. It became quite important in the recent meta Gregorius comps that don't run any dedicated healing EXs in line with the current overall meta of sacrificing almost everything for more damage and sometimes relying on healing via normal skills or passive skills. So why did we need a combo Sakurako and Asuna anyways? Well, that starts coming together when you consider it with the other student who was added. That's Swimsuit Nagusa. She's the Swimsuit Hoshino for special students, so you better bet she's power crept Gregorius. Swimsuit Hoshino with the right yellow armor type for Gregorius nonetheless. The red effectiveness on her EX skill and sub-skill is her most striking characteristic, but the damage isn't the last of it. Nagusa comes packing a debuff of her own on her normal skill, which grants her increased compatibility with the 3-count debuffers. It does have some downtime though, and her UE passive is buff duration, so it won't make Nagusa's debuffs last longer. Sometimes in the prominent timelines you even use her EX for nothing, to adjust the timing of the normal skill to have the debuff on at the right time. Running her with Rena, you get critical damage, attack damage, and explosive effectiveness across 2 students. Pretty compact, no? That's it for the changes from last time. So let's talk about what happened with the meta then. I'm going to focus mainly on Torment and above. Cheap Extreme can already be done with a borrowed Nagisa and Tsubaki. Insane, you'll run Dress Hina or a special comp, whichever is closer to your roster. And Torment, most people opted for the Dress Hina comp if they had access to it. On average, it's cheaper, and it also comes out with the faster score if you're going to race your way to Plat. No special teams made the Platinum cut for Torment as expected. Since the second run of Gregorius, Torment became Hina's game, because she became strong enough to kill Gregorius before we even reached the final stage, with some timeline magic to stop the second yellow wave from taking Hina out of the picture. This season of Gregorius hasn't changed that. The fastest timeline uses both Mine and Mina, a bit on the expensive side, but it manages a kill in the second phase across 3 sets of Hina EXs. Extremely moldy though, and you'll need to pack your screen bindings for this one. The Platinum Hina comps all share Swimsuit Hoshino, Dress Hina, Mine, and Kisaki. No fighting against that. I've tried. The last Striker slot and Special slot have a little bit of variation though. For Mine's +1 on debuffs, people chose between Armed Hoshino, Mina, or even Swimsuit Miyako. For the bare minimum Platinum runs, they finished around the second shot of the third phase with quick execution. And finally, Lunatic difficulty. If you're one of the original 1000 who cleared without Misaki, Rena, or Nagusa, you were perfectly welcome to just do it again exactly the same way. Maybe you did anyways if you didn't pull for any of those 3. The old way required a minimum of 2 teams. Most people did some split of Minori, Hibiki, Yuzu, and Hina teams, and whatever else they could muster up if they came short. We've got quite the power inflation this time though. The times improved quite significantly, and the super team especially became quite potent. Like really potent. Kill the boss in one team potent, if you mastered it and got the right death timings. The Exodia win button comp featured Armed Hoshino, Mina, Rena, and Swimsuit Nagusa for the strikers, and Nagisa and Swimsuit Misaki for the specials. Armed Hoshino tanks and constantly keeps 1 debuff on Greg. Mina contributes 3 debuffs, 1 being a very important attack debuff for survival. Rena hyperbuffs the specials as well as healing the lowest health student and herself. Swimsuit Nagisa also hyperbuffs while contributing 1 debuff. Nagisa contributes damage, 1 big defense debuff, big healing, and crit damage. And Swimsuit Misaki is big damage. For the people who weren't whale enough to assemble Exodia, they were still able to adopt whatever piecemeal improvement they had access to. Like just subbing Misaki in where you used Minori before alone made a big improvement. That alone nearly got someone with none of the new characters into the 3-digit range out of 8,000 lunatics. That's not to say it's particularly cheap now. The further away you are from the super comp of today or yesterday, the more you're going to have to throw even more for less. For the folks who are seasoned monthly packers or above though, I think it's tuned to a reasonably good place. The best Misaki team you can field gets you most of the way, and then you'll have to cope the rest using Hibiki, Hina, and whatever else the desperate sensei can muster up. And if your roster isn't quite there yet, there's still thousands of Torment speedrunning balding spots. Admittedly, I've entered the fossil part of my Blue Archive lifecycle, and I'm starting to feel out of touch with what any newer generation of Blue Archive players would be missing, as much as I try to stay cognizant of what I describe as cheap or highly available. Like how I would expect a tryhard of any level to have Kisaki even if she's permanent, but then I try to be more conscious of missing limiteds like Armed Hoshino or New Year Fuka. Anyways, that's all I've got for the meta update on Gregorius of Season 90. The rest is an anecdotal account of my experience with this season. Day 1. As a more or less comfortable player, the lower runs were going through the motions as expected. I was playing during lunch at work for hard, very hard, and hardcore, so this was done from a phone for once in a while, as opposed to the usual shitum chest stare that I play from. It's nothing compared to back when I was playing on a 4GB of RAM iPhone. That thing would randomly run out of memory while I was playing and literally crash Blue Archive. But I still prefer the extra screen size to comfortably use the controls. As expected, these difficulties were pretty uneventful. I went with whatever I wanted, mostly relying on special students as was John's intended design. I think hardcore was the farthest I got in my first run of Greg, so it was a little bit reminiscent. Alas, I'm past the stage of my balding career where I have any interest in balding hardcore for 1 day's worth of leaderboard rankings. I called it a day with a bronze-worthy score. Day 2. Extreme was another roll cakewalk. Just mopped that up pretty handily with some more artillery. Once we got to Insane, I at least had to pay attention to the debuff count. It brings me back to my second run of Gregorius. I had Nagisa who had taught me how to spark from a very young account age, And there was Maid Yuzu, who had taught me that having cheap elifs from the minigame doesn't mean much when she's going to ask for a million Phaistos discs. Because back then I didn't have Mine, Swimsuit Saki, or Mina. So I borrowed Mine at the time. Even Insane felt like a struggle back then. Naturally, times have changed a lot, and I can clear Insane with ease, owing to a mostly filled out roster. I could have done a Dress Hina team, but I find the special teams more forgiving anyways, since you can be a lot sloppier running a full team of strikers who are wearing the right armor. Just loosely debuffing while throwing out special attacks gets you to the finish line. And since I had picked up Rena and Swimsuit Nagusa, it was time to give them their first upgrades. I also threw some mats at Mina because why not? This might have even been counterproductive since the dodging can add unwanted randomness to the health adjustments. After the credits and reports became more abundant with the increase in drop rates, my purse strings have become a lot looser. Since Insane doesn't require as many debuffs, I also only ran Mina and a tank that does nothing. And also Mari because I wanted it to be extra comfy. It was a pleasant little play for fun session. And then it was time to do Torment. There are a lot of fairly affordable options that I would dare call free to play. Assuming you're mostly following the conventional pull recommendations, you'd probably be able to scrap together a clear at least. Since I pulled the top shelf stuff, it would be a bit embarrassing if I couldn't clear Torment. I've done it before. Last time I used the suboptimal Hina comp though, and I've completely forgotten the timeline for using Mine. So I opted to use Torment to practice the special timeline that I would be using in Lunatic instead. Torment and Lunatic have the same number of debuffs required, so the timeline can be literally copy and pasted between the difficulties. If I was going to have a fallback, I would have had to relearn the Dress Hina comp, and that was the last thing I wanted to do, because I had already decided that wasn't the road I was taking this time. I had decided I would go Lunatic or go Bust. I'd say the Torment run went pretty smooth once I got the timeline somewhat down. It was mostly uneventful since the boss is mostly dead by the time you enter the final phase, and then you finish him off with a lot of margin for error. And now it was time for the real showdown. I'm pretty impressed by how this timeline comes together. Particularly, it makes a lot of little decisions that seem strange at face value, like using Nagisa in the beginning when she isn't even buffing any of the special attackers, or using Nagisa at a timing where you eat an empowered yellow wave when you had the window to get the debuff count to green and eat less damage. I made pretty much every mistake possible with this timeline, and each time I was humbled after doing it according to the recipe and things turning out fine. Like the seemingly pointless Nagisa buff at the beginning is to adjust her normal skill's debuff timing for the rest of the fight, and Nagisa is used late to help guide Nagisa's heals for the rest of the fight, allowing for all of your striker supports to live to the end, or at least until you want them to die. Things mostly worked consistently after following the timeline to the T. There was one part that caused moderately frequent retries though, even with correct execution. I can't tell if it was investment levels or some RNG with Greg's stability, but there were some instances where Mina would get Nagisa's first normal skill instead of Rena. That would affect the healing for the rest of the run and cause someone to die in the third yellow wave. Not ideal. The other variable that caused issues at times was Hoshino's health moving into the final phase. In some instances, Hoshino would die immediately as we spawned into the final phase. There's a Goldilocks zone for Hoshino's health if you're doing a die strat. Too little and she gets pushed out at the wrong time before you've gotten how much cost you need out of her. Too much and, well, she doesn't die. So much for a die strat. And finally the most important skill issue. The operation of EX skills in the last phase. Since the locations you're aiming at are fixed, this favors people who can hotkey screen positions naturally. Not that it's humanly impossible, but you'd have to be quite primed and precise to get everything done in time. If not, you won't have time for the last Misaki EX skill to hit. It would usually fizzle out mid-launch, because the animation is quite long. And then you have to use a second team. Guess which group I fell into? Yep, I had to sweep out the remainders with Hibiki. If I wasn't skill diffed, I wouldn't have even had to select Mine. But this way I get to put her to use. Best to be prepared, I guess. Mine Mine was dying when I tried to do the Hina comp at 4 stars. The main issue here was that Mine is a bit squishy being only neutral armor for Greg. And 5 stars does help with the extra health. For being her best raid, it's a bit amusing, but you work around it. And I was back into miser mode with my Eligma. Not that I had any interest in putting together anything optimal. So instead, I opted to run a special comp with Hibiki and the old idols. I just didn't have a good reference when I was doing it, and the amount of health left seemed like it could be coped even with something sloppy. I mostly borrowed the initial Mine and Haruka timings from somebody and played the rest by feel. As long as I made it to the final phase without Mine or Sakurako getting lopped off at some point, it was generally okay. Anyways, I managed to cobble something together, and then I put it to a ticket and got my clear. At this point, I was already pretty confident that it wasn't going to get to a Lunatic border. but since a later run went better anyways, it got upscored a bit. With all the practice, I was pretty comfortable with getting enough from the first team for a comfortable second team clear, so the rest of the week was just casually burning tickets. Good evening! Alright, great. Time to claim the trophy. With the trophy in hand, all that's left is to put it in place. No more gold stains in the trophy lineup. Fantastic! It's been a journey. Greg was my first and last bronze, and he was also my final platinum among the revenge matches. I should be able to fill in this last hot slot as well if things go well soon. It feels like a chapter's closing, and I feel I might even be ready to start letting some reruns go gold, if it grants me the pyro relief to pursue some of the older limiteds that I wasn't able to get. Because on reflection, I don't think I need a cafe filled with the same trophy. Anyways, that's all for this time. Thanks for watching.